Part Second. So runs the world. Zola. I have a great respect for every accomplished work. Every time I put on the end of any of my works, finis, I feel satisfied, not because the work is done, not on account of future success, but on account of an accomplished deed. Every book is a deed, bad or good, but at any rate accomplished, and a series of them, written with a special aim, is an accomplished purpose of life. It is a feast during which the workers have the right to receive a wreath, and to sing, "We bring the crop, the crop." Evidently the merit depends on the result of the work. The profession of the writer has its thorns, about which the reader does not dream. A farmer, bringing the crop to his barn, has this absolute surety, that he brings wheat, rye, barley, or oats which will be useful to the people. An author, writing even with the best of faith, may have moments of doubt, whether instead of bread he did not give poison, whether his work is not a great mistake or a great misdeed, whether it has brought profit to humanity, or whether, were it not better for the people and himself, had he not written anything, nothing accomplished. Such doubts are foes to human peace, but at the same time they are a filter, which does not pass any dirt. It is bad when there are too many of them, it is bad when too few. In the first case the ability for deeds disappears, in the second, the conscience. Hence the eternal, as humanity, need of exterior regulator. But the French writers always had more originality and independence than others, and that regulator, which elsewhere was religion, long since ceased to exist for them. There were some exceptions, however. Balzac used to affirm that his aim was to serve religion and monarchy. But even the works of those who confessed such principles were not in harmony with themselves. One can say that it pleased the authors to understand their activity in that way, but the reading masses could understand it and often understood it as a negation of religious and ethical principles. In the last epoch, however, such misunderstanding became impossible, because the authors began to write, either in the name of their personal convictions, directly opposite to social principles and ties, or with objective analysis, which, in its action of life, marks the good and the evil as manifestations equally necessary and equally justified. France, and through France the rest of Europe, was overflowed with a deluge of books, written with such light-heartedness, so absolute, and with such daring, not counting on any responsibility toward people, that even those who received them without any scruples began to be overcome with astonishment. It seemed that every author forced himself to go further than they expected him to. In that way they succeeded in being called daring thinkers and original artists. The boldness in touching certain subjects, and the way of interpreting them, seemed to be the best quality of the writer. To that was joined bad faith, or unconscious deceiving of himself and others. Analysis. They analyzed in the name of truth, which apparently must, and has the right to be said, everything, but especially the evil, dirt, human corruption. They did not notice that the pseudo-analysis ceases to be an objective analysis, and becomes a sickish liking for rotten things, coming from two causes: in the first place from the corruption of the taste, then from greater facility of producing striking effects. They utilized the philological faculty of the senses, on the strength of which repulsive impressions appear to us stronger and more real than agreeable, and they abused that property beyond measure. There was created a certain kind of traveling in putridness, because the subjects being exhausted very quickly, there was a necessity to find something new which could attract. The truth itself, in the name of which it was done, was put in a corner in the presence of such exigencies. Are you familiar with Zola's La Terre? This novel is to represent a picture of a French village. Try and think of a French village, or of any other village. How does it look altogether? It is a gathering of houses, trees, fields, pastures, wild flowers, people, herds, light, sky, singing, small country, business, and work. In all that, without any doubt, the manure plays an important part, but there is something more behind it and besides it. But Zola's village looks as if it was composed exclusively of manure and crime. Therefore the picture is false, the truth twisted, because in nature the true relation of things is different. If anyone would like to take the trouble of making a list of the women represented in French novels, he would persuade himself that at least 95% of them were fallen women. But in society it is not, and cannot be, So, probably even in the countries where they worshipped Astarte, there were less bad women. Notwithstanding this, the authors try to persuade us that they are giving a true picture of society, and that their analysis of customs is an objective one. The lie, exaggeration, liking for rotten things such as the exact picture in contemporary novels. I do not know what profit there is in literature like that, but I do know that the devil has not lost anything, because through this channel flows a river of mud and poison, and the moral sense became so dulled that finally they tolerated such books which a few decades ago would have brought the author to court. Today we do not wish to believe that the author of Madame Bovary had 2 criminal suits. Had this book been written 20 years later, they would have found it too modest. But the human spirit, which does not slumber, and the organism that wishes to live, does not suffer excessive poison. Finally there came a moment for hiccups of disgust. Some voices began to rise, asking for other spiritual bread. An instinctive sentiment awakes and cries that it cannot continue any longer in this way, that one must arise, shake off the mud, clean, change. The people ask for a fresh breeze. The masses cannot say what they want, but they know what they do not want. They know they are breathing bad air, and that they are suffocating. An uneasiness takes hold of their minds. Even in France they are seeking and crying for something different. They began to protest against the actual state of affairs. Many writers felt that uneasiness. They had some moments of doubt, about which I have spoken already, and those doubts were stronger on account of the uncertainty of the new roads. Look at the last books of Bourget, Rod, Bars, Desjardins, the poetry of Rimbaud, Verlaine, Heredia, Mallarmé, and even Maeterlinck and his school. What do you find there? The searching for new essence and new form, feverish seeking for some issue, uncertainty where to go and where to look for help in religion or mysticism, in duty outside of faith, or in patriotism or in humanity. Above all, however, one sees in them an immense uneasiness. They do not find any issue, because for it one needs 2 things, a great idea and a great talent, and they did not have either of them. Hence the uneasiness increases, and the same authors who rouse against rough pessimism of naturalistic direction fell into pessimism themselves, and by this the principal importance and aim of a reform became weaker. What remains then? The bizarre form. And in this bizarre form, whether it is called symbolism or impressionism, they go in deeper and become more entangled, losing artistic equilibrium, common sense, and serenity of the soul. Often they fall into the former corruption as far as the essence is concerned, and almost always into dissonance with oneself, because they have an honest sentiment that they must give to the world something new, and they know not what. Such are the present times. Among those searching in darkness, wandering and weary ones, one remained quiet, sure of himself and his doctrine, immovable and almost serious in his pessimism. It was Émile Zola, a great talent, slow but powerful and a potent force, surprising objectivism if the question is about a sentiment, because it is equal to almost complete indifference, such an exceptional gift of seeing the entire soul of humanity and things that it approaches this naturalistic writer to mystics all that gives him a very great and unusual originality. The physical figure does not always reproduce the spiritual individuality. In Zola, this relation comes out very strikingly. A square face, low forehead covered with wrinkles, rough features, high shoulders and short neck, give to his person a rough appearance. Looking at his face and those wrinkles around the eyes, you can guess that he is a man who can stand much, that he is persevering and stubborn, not only in his projects but in the realization of them. But what is mere important, he is so in his thinking also. There is no keenness in him. At the first glance of the eye one can see that he is a doctrinarian shut up in himself, who does not embrace large horizons, sees everything at a certain angle, narrow-mindedly yet seen distinctly. His mind, like a dark lantern, throws an arrow light in only one direction, and he goes in that direction with immovable surety. In that way the history of a series of his books called Les Rougon-Macquart becomes clear. Zola was determined to write the history of a certain family at the time of the Empire, on the ground of conditions produced by it. In consideration of the law of heredity, there was a question even about something more than this consideration, because this heredity had to become the physiological foundation of the work. There is a certain contradiction in the premises. Speaking historically, Rougon-Macquart had to be a picture of French society during its last times, according to their moral manifestations of life. Therefore, they ought to be of themselves more or less a normal family. But in such a case, what shall one do with heredity? To be sure, moral families are such on the strength of the law of heredity, but it is impossible to show it in such conditions. One can do it only in exceptional cases of the normal type. Therefore the Rougon are in fact a sick family. They are children of nervousness. It was contracted by the first mother of the family, and since that time the coming generations, one after another, followed with the same stigma on their foreheads. This is the way the author wishes to have it, and one must agree with him. In what way, however, can a history of one family exceptionally endowed with a mental disorder be at the same time a picture of French society? The author does not explain to us. Had he said that during the Empire all society was sick, it would be a trick. A society can walk in the perilous road of politics or customs and be sick as a community, and at the same time have healthy individuals and families. These are two different things. Therefore one of the two, either the Rougon are sick, and, in that case, the cycle of novels about them is not a picture of French society during the Empire. It is only a psychological study or the whole physiological foundations, all this heredity on which the cycle is based. In a word, Zola's whole doctrine is nonsense. I do not know whether anyone has paid attention to Zola at this out. It is sure that he never thought of it himself. Probably it would not have had any influence, as the criticisms had no influence on his theory of heredity. Critics and physiologists attacked him ofttimes with an arsenal of irrefutable arguments. It did not do any good. They affirmed in vain that the theory of heredity is not proved by any science, and above all it is difficult to grasp it and show it by facts. They pointed in vain that physiology cannot be fantastical and its laws cannot depend on the free conception of an author. Zola listened, continued to write, and in the last volume he gave a genealogical tree of the family of Rougon-Macquart, with such a serenity as if no one ever doubted his theory. At any rate, this tree has one advantage. It is so pretentious, so ridiculous, that it takes away from the theory the seriousness which it would have given to less individual minds. We learn from it that from a nervously sick great-grandmother grows a sick family. But the one who would think that her nervousness is seen in descendants as it is in the physical field, in a certain similar way, in some inclination or passion for something, will be greatly mistaken. On the contrary, the marvelous tree produces different kinds of fruit. You can find on it red apples, pears, plums, cherries, and everything you might desire. And all that on account of great-grandmother's nervousness. Is it the same way in nature? We do not know. Zola himself does not have any other proofs than clippings from newspapers, describing different crimes. He preserved these clippings carefully as human documents, and which he uses according to his fancy. It can be granted to him, but he must not sell us such fancy for the eternal and immutable laws of nature. Grandmother did have nervousness. Her nearest friends were in the habit of searching for remedies against ills not in a drugstore. Therefore her male and female descendants are such as they must be, namely, criminals, thieves, fast women, honest people, saints, politicians, good mothers, bankers, farmers, murderers, priests, soldiers, ministers. In a word, everything which in the sphere of the mind, in the sphere of health, in the sphere of wealth and position, in the sphere of profession, can be and are men as well as women in the whole world. One is stupefied voluntarily. What then? And all that on account of grandmother's nervousness? Yes, answers the author. But if Adelaide Fouque had not had it, her descendants would be good or bad just the same and have the same occupations men and women usually have in this world. Certainly, Zola answers. But Adelaide Fouque had nervousness. And further discussion is impossible, because one has to do with a man who his own voluntary fancy takes for a law of nature, and his brain cannot be opened with a key furnished by logic. He built a genealogical tree. This tree could have been different, but if it was different, he would sustain that it can be only such as it is, and he would prefer to be killed rather than be convinced that his theory was worthless. At any rate, It is such a theory that it is not worthwhile to quarrel about it. A long time ago it was said that Zola had one good thing, his talent, and one bad, his doctrine. If as a consequence of an inherited nervousness one can become a rascal as well as a good man, a sister of charity as well as Nana, a farmer boy as well as Achilles, in that case there is an heredity which does not exist. A man can be that which he wishes to be. The field for goodwill and responsibility is open, and all those moral foundations on which human life is based come out of the fire safely. We could say to the author that there is too much ado about nothing, and finish with him as one finishes with a doctrinarian and count only his talent. But he cares for something else. No matter if his doctrine is empty, he makes from it other deductions. The entire cycle of his book speaks precisely. No matter what you are, saint or criminal, you are such on the strength of the law of heredity. You are such as you must be, and in that case you have neither merit nor are you guilty. Here is the question of responsibility. But we are not going to discuss it. The philosophy has not yet found the proof of the existence of man, and when cogito ergo sum of Cartesius was not sufficient for it, the question is still open. Even if all centuries of philosophy affirm it or not, the man is intrinsically persuaded that he exists, and no less persuaded that he is responsible for his whole life, which, without any regard to his theories, is based on such persuasion. And then even the science did not decide the question of the whole responsibility. Against authorities one can quote other authorities, against opinions one can bring other opinions, against deductions other deductions. But for Zola such opinion is decided. There is only one grandmother Adelaide, or grandfather Jacques, on whom everything depends. From that point begins, according to my opinion, the bad influence of the writer, because he not only decides difficult questions to be decided once and forever, but he popularizes them and facilitates the corruption of society. No matter if every thief or every murderer can appeal to a grandmother with nervousness, courts, notwithstanding the cycle of Rougon-Macquart, will place them behind bars. The evil is not in single cases, but in this, that into the human soul a bad pessimism and depression flows, that the charm of life is destroyed, the hope, the energy, the liking for life, and therefore all effort in the direction of good is shattered. A quaba, such is the question coming by itself. A book is also an activity, forming human souls. If at least the reader would find in Zola's book the bad and good side of human life in an equal proportion, or at least in such as one can find it in reality. Vain hope. One must climb high in order to get colors from a rainbow or sunset, but everybody has saliva in his mouth and it is easy to paint with it. This naturalist prefers cheap effects more than others do. He prefers mildew to perfumes, la bête humaine to l'âme humaine. If we could bring an inhabitant of Venus or Mars to the earth and ask him to judge of life on the earth from Zola's novels, he would say most assuredly, this life is sometimes quite pure, like Le Rêve, but in general it is a thing which smells bad, is slippery, moist, dreadful. And even if the theories on which Zola has based his works were, as they are not, acknowledged truths, what a lack of pity to represent life in such a way to the people, who must live just the same. Does he do it in order to ruin, to disgust, to poison every action, to paralyze every energy, to discourage all thinking? In the presence of that, we are even sorry that he has a talent. It would have been better for him, for France, that he had not had it. And one wonders that he is not frightened, that when a fear seizes even those who did not lead to corruption, he alone with such a tranquility finishes his Rougon-Macquart as if he had strengthened the capacity for a life of the French people instead of having destroyed it. How is it possible that he cannot understand that people brought up on such corrupted bread and drinking such bad water, not only will be unable to resist the storm, but even they will not have an inclination to do so? Musset has written in his time this famous verse, "We had already your German Rhine." Zola brings up his society in such a way that, if everything that he planted would take root, the second of Musset's verses would be, "But today we will give you even the same." But it is not as bad as that. La Debacle is a remarkable book, notwithstanding all its faults. But the soldiers, who will read it, will be defeated by those who in the night sing, "Glory, glory, hallelujah." I consider Zola's talent as a national misfortune, and I am glad that his times are passing away, that even the most zealous pupils abandon the master who stands alone more and more. Will humanity remember him in literature? Will his fame pass? We cannot affirm, but we can doubt. In The Cycle of Rougon-Macquart there are powerful volumes, as germinal or audiobook, but in general, that which Zola's natural talent made for his immortality was spoiled by a liking for dirty realism and his filthy language. Literature cannot use such expressions of which even peasants are ashamed. The real truth, if the question is about vicious people, can be attained by other means, by probable reproduction of the state of their souls, thoughts, deeds, finally by the run of their conversation, but not by verbal quotation of their swearings and most horrid words. As in the choice of pictures, so in the choice of expression, exist certain measures, pointed at by reason and good taste. Zola overstepped it to such a degree, Lothair, to which nobody yet dared to approach. Monsters are killed because they are monsters. A book which is the cause of disgust must be abandoned. It is the natural order of things. From old production as of universal literature survive the forgetfulness of the rough productions, destined to excite laughter, Aristophanes, Rabelais, etc. or lascivious things, but written with an elegance, Boccaccio. Not one book written in order to excite nausea outlived. Zola, for the sake of the renown caused by his works, for the sake of the scandal produced by every one of his volumes, killed his future. On account of that happened a strange thing. It happened that he, a man writing according to a conceived plan, writing with deliberation, cold and possessing his subjects as very few writers are, created good things only when he had the least opportunity to realize his plans, doctrines, means, in a word, when he dominated the subject the least and was dominated by the subject most. Such was the case in Germinal and Audiobook. The immensity of socialism and the immensity of the war simply crushed Zola with all his mental apparatus. His doctrines became very small in the presence of such dimensions, and hardly anyone hears of them in the noise of the deluge, overflowing the Main and in the thundering of Prussian cannons. Only talent remained. Therefore in both those books there are pages worthy of Dante. Quite a different thing happened with Dr. Pascal. Being the last volume of the cycle, it was bound to be the last deduction, from the whole work, the synthesis of the doctrine, the belfry of the whole building. Consequently in this volume Zola speaks more about doctrine than in any other previous volume, as the doctrine is bad, wicked, and false. Therefore Dr. Pascal is the worst and most tedious book of all the cycle of Rougon-Macquart. It is a series of empty leaves on which tediousness is hand in hand with lack of moral sense. It is a pale picture full of falsehood such as le Dr. Pascal. Zola wishes to have him an honest man. He is the outcast of the family Rougon-Macquart. In heredity there happens such lucky degeneration. The doctor knows about it. He considers himself as a happy exception, and it is for him a source of continuous inward pleasure. In the meanwhile, he loves people, serves them and sells them his medicine, which cures all possible disease. He is a sweet sage, who studies life. Therefore he gathers human documents, builds laboriously the genealogical tree of the family of Rougon-Macquart, whose descendant he is himself, and on the strength of his observations he comes to the same conclusion as Zola. To which it is difficult to answer the question, but here it is more or less. If anyone is not well, usually he is sick and that heredity exists, but mothers and fathers who come from other families can bring into the blood of children new elements. In that way heredity can be modified to such a degree that strictly speaking it does not exist. To all that Dr. Pascal is a positivist. He does not wish to affirm anything, but he does affirm that actual state of science does not permit of any further deductions than those which on the strength of the observation of known facts can be deducted. Therefore one must hold them, and neglect the others. In that respect his prejudices do not tell us anything more than newspaper articles, written by young positivists. For the people, who are rushing forward, for those spiritual needs, as strong as thirst and hunger, by which the man felt such ideas as God, faith, immortality, the doctor has only a smile of commiseration, and one might wonder at him a little bit. One could understand him better if he did not acknowledge the possibility of the disentangling of different abstract questions, but he affirms that the necessity does not exist by which he sins against evidence, because such a necessity exists, not further than under his own roof, in the person of his niece. This young person, brought up in his principles, at once loses the ground under her feet. In her soul arose more questions than the doctor was able to answer, and from this moment began a drama for both of them. "I cannot be satisfied with that," cries the niece, "I am choking, I must know something, and if your science cannot satisfy my necessity, I am going there where they will not only tranquilize me, not only explain everything to me, but also will make me happy. I am going to church." And she went. The roads of master and pupil diverge more and more. The pupil comes to the conclusion that the science which is only a slip knot on the human neck is positively bad, and that it would be a great merit before God to burn those old papers in which the doctor writes his observations. And the drama becomes stronger, because notwithstanding the doctor being 60 years old, and Clotilda is only 20 years old, these two people are in love, not only as relations are in love, but as a man and woman love each other. This love adds more bitterness to the fight and prompts the catastrophe. On a certain night the doctor detected the niece in a criminal deed. She opened his desk, took out his papers, and she was ready to burn them up. They began to fight. Beautiful picture. Both are in nightgowns. They pull each other's hair, they scratch each other. He is stronger than she, although he has bitten her. She feels a certain pleasure in that experiment on her maiden skin of the strength of a man. And that is the whole of Zola. But let us listen, because the decisive moment approaches. The doctor himself, after having rested a while, announces it solemnly. The reader shivers. Will the doctor by the strength of his genius tear the sky and show to her emptiness beyond the stars? Or will he by the strength of his eloquence ruin her church, her creed, her ecstasies, her hopes? In the quietness the doctor's low voice is heard. "I did not wish to show you that, but it cannot last any longer. The time has come. Give me the genealogical tree of Rougon-Macquart." Yes, the genealogical tree of Rougon-Macquart. The reading of it begins: "There was one Adelaide Fouque, who married Rougon-Macquart's friend. Rougon had Eugene Rougon, also Pascal Rougon, also Aristides, also Sidonie, also Martha. Aristides had Maxime, Clotilda, Victor, and Maxime had Charles, and so on to the end. But Sidonie had a daughter Angèle, and Martha, who married Marais, who was from Macquart's family, had 3 children, etc." The night passes, pales, but the reading continues. After Rougons come Macquarts, then the generations of both families. One name follows another. They appear bad, good, indifferent, all classes, from ministers, bankers, great merchants, to simple soldiers or rascals without any professions. Finally the doctor stops reading and, looking with his eyes of savant at his niece, asks, "Well, what now?" And beautiful Clotilda throws herself into his arms, crying, "Viciste, Viciste!" And her God, her church, her flight toward ideals, her spiritual needs disappeared, turned into ashes. Why? On the ground of what final conclusion? For what good reason? What could there be in the tree that convinced her? How could it produce any other impression than that of tediousness? Why did she not ask the question, which surely must have come to the lips of the reader, "And what then?" It is unknown. I never noticed that any other author could deduct from such a trifling and insignificant cause such great and immediate consequences. It is as much of an astonishment as if Zola should order Clotilda's faith and principles to be turned into ashes after the doctor has read to her an almanac, timetable, bill of fare, or catalogue of some museum. The freedom surpasses here all possible limits and becomes absolutely incomprehensible. The reader asks whether the author deceives himself or if he wishes to throw some dust into the eyes of the public. And this climax of the novel is at the same time the downfall of all doctrine. Clotilda ought to have answered as follows: "Your theory has no connection with my faith in God and the Church. Your heredity is so loose and on the strength of it one can be so much, everything, that it becomes nothing. Therefore the consequences which you deduct from it also are based upon nothing. Nana, according to you, is a street walker, and Angèle is a saint, the priest Marais is an ascetic, Jacques Landier a murderer, and all that on account of great-grandmother Adelaide. But I tell you with more real probability, that the good are good because they have my faith, because they believe in responsibility and immortality of the soul, and the bad are bad because they do not believe in anything. How can you prove that the cause of good and bad is in great-grandmother Adelaide Fouque? Perhaps you will tell me that it is so because it is so, but I can tell you that the faith and responsibility were for centuries a stopper for evil, and you cannot deny it, if you wish to be a positivist, because those are material facts. In a word, I have objective proofs where you have your personal views, and if it is so, then leave my faith and throw your fancy into the fire. But Clotilde does not answer anything like this. On the contrary, she eats at once the apple from this tree, passes soul and body into the doctor's camp, and she does it because Zola wishes to have it that way. There is no other reason for it and cannot be. Had she done that on account of love for the doctor, had this reason, which in a woman can play such an important part, acted on her, everything would be easy to understand. But there is no such thing. In that case, what would become of all of Zola's doctrine? It acts exclusively upon Clotilde. The author wishes to have only such a reason, and it happens as he wishes, but at the cost of logic and common sense. Since that time everything would be permitted, one will be allowed to persuade the reader that the man who is not loved makes a woman fall in love with him by means of showing her a price list of butter or candies. To such results a great and true talent is conducted by a doctrine. This doctrine conducts also to perfect atrophy of moral sense. This heredity is a wall in which one can make as many windows as one pleases. The doctor is such a window. He considers himself as being degenerated from the nervousness of the family. It means that he is a normal man, and as such he would transmit his health to his descendants. Clotilde thinks also that it would be quite a good idea, and as they are in love, consequently they take possession of each other, and they do it as did people in the Epoch of Caverns. Zola considered it a perfectly natural thing. Dr. Pascal thinks the same, and as Clotilde passed into his camp, she did not make any opposition. This appears a little strange. Clotilde was religious only a little while ago. Her youth and lack of experience do not justify her either. Even at 8 years, girls have some sentiment of modesty. At 20 years a young girl always knows what she is doing, and she cannot be called a sacrifice, and if she departs from the sentiment of modesty she does it either by love, which makes noble the raptures, or because she does it by the act of duty. But at the same time she wishes to be herself a legitimated duty. Even if a woman is an irreligious being and she refuses to be blessed by religion, she can desire that her sentiment were legitimated. The priest or Monsieur le Maire, Clotilde, who loves Dr. Pascal, does not ask for anything. Marriage, accomplished by a maire, seems to her to be a secondary thing. Here also one cannot understand her, because a true love would wish to make the knot lasting. That which really happens is quite different. In the novel, that first separation is the end of the relation between them. Were they married at least by a maire, they would have remained even in the separation husband and wife. They would not cease to belong to each other, but as they were not married, therefore at the moment of her departure he became unmarried. As formerly, Dr. Pascal, she seduced Clotilde. Even during their life in common there happened 1,000 disagreeable incidents for both of them. One time, for instance, Clotilde rushes crying and red, and when the frightened doctor asks her what is the matter, she answers, "Ah, those women." Walking in the shade, I closed my parasol and I hurt a child. In that moment all of the women fell on me and began to shout such things. Ah, it was so dreadful, that I shall never have any children, that such things are not for such a dishcloth as I. And many other things which I cannot repeat. I do not wish to repeat them. I do not even understand them. Her breast was moved by sobbings. He became pale, and seizing her by the shoulders, commenced to cover her face with kisses, saying, "It's my fault, you suffer through me. Listen, we will go very far from here, where no one knows us, where everybody will greet you and you shall be happy. Only one thing does not come to their minds, to be married." When Pascal's mother speaks to him about it, they do not listen to it. It is not dictated to her by woman's modesty, to him by the care for her and the desire to shelter her from insults. Why? Because Zola likes it that way. But perhaps he cares to show what tragical results are produced by illegitimate marriages? Not at all. He shares the doctor's and Clotilde's opinion. Were they married, there would be no drama, and the author wishes to have it. That is the reason. Then comes the doctor's insolvency. One must separate. This separation becomes the misfortune of their lives. The doctor will die of it. Both feel that it will not be the end. They do not wish it, and they do not think of any means which would forever affirm their mutual dependence and change the departure for only a momentary separation, but not for eternal farewells. And they do not marry. They did not have any religion, therefore they did not wish for any priest. It is logical. But why did they not wish for a mayor? The question remains without an answer. Here, besides lack of moral sense, there is something more. The lack of common sense. The novel is not only immoral, but at the same time it is a bad shanty, built of rotten pieces of wood, not holding together, unable to suffer any contact with logic and common sense. In such mud of nonsense, even the talent was drowned. One thing remains. The poison flows as usual in the soul of the reader. The mind became familiar with the evil and ceased to despise it. The poison licks, spoils the simplicity of the soul, moral impressions and that sense of conscience which distinguishes the bad from the good. The doctor dies from languishing after Clotilda. She comes back under the old roof and takes care of the child. Nothing of that which the doctor sowed in her soul had perished. On the contrary, everything grows very well. She loved the life. She also loves it now. She is resigned to it entirely, not through resignation but because she acknowledges it, and the more she thinks of it, rocking in her lap the child without a name, she acknowledges more. Such is the end of Rougon Macquartz. But such an end is a new surprise. Here we have before us 19 volumes, and in those volumes, as Zola himself says, tant debout, tant d'alarme, c'était assez demander si d'un coup de foudre, il n'aurait pas mieux valu balayer cette forme l'air gaieté et miserable. And it is true. Anyone who will read those volumes comes to the conclusion that life is a blindly mechanical and exasperating process, in which one must take part because one cannot avoid it. There is more mud in it than green grass, more corruption than wholesomeness, more odor of corpses than perfume of flowers, more illness, more madness, and more crime than health and virtue. It is a Gehenna not only dreadful but also abominable. The hair rises on the head, and in the meanwhile the mouth is wet, and the question comes, will it not be better that a thunderbolt destroyed cette forme l'air gaieté et miserable? There cannot be any other conclusion, because any other would be a madman's mental aberration, the breaking of the rules of sense and logic. And now do you know how the cycle of these novels really ended? By a hymn in the worship of life. Here one's hands drop. It will be useless work to show again that the author comes to a conclusion which is illogical with his whole work. God bless him. But he must not be astonished if he is abandoned by his pupils. The people must think according to rules of logic. And as in the meanwhile they must live, consequently they wish to get some consolation in this life. Masters of Zola's kind gave them only corruption, chaos, disgust for life, and despair. Their rationalism cannot prove anything else, and if it did, it would be with too much zeal. It would overstep the limits. Today, the suffocated need some pure error, the doubting one some hope, tormented by uneasiness, some quietude. Therefore they are doing well when they turn there from where the hope and peace flow, there where they bless them and where they say to them as to Lazarus, Tolle grey bottom tum et ambula. By this one can explain today's evolutions, whose waves flow to all parts of the world. According to my opinion, poetry as well as novels must pass through it even more. They must quicken it and make it more powerful. One cannot continue any longer that way. On an exhausted field, only weeds grow. The novel must strengthen the life, not shake it, make it nobler, not soil it, carry good news, and not bad. It does not matter whether this which I say here please anyone or not, because I believe that I feel the great and urgent need of the human soul, which cries for a change.